Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from another former employee of Kingspan.
Yes, could we have Dr. Malcolm Rochefort, please?
Good morning.
Can I please ask you to read out the witness affirmation text?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rochefort. Would you like to sit down and make yourself comfortable there? Now, before you start, I notice you have two glasses, one of which has some water in. Does that come with you, or?
It came with me.
Oh, good.
I prepared it in case needed some.
I just wanted to make sure we hadn't left it there. But
No.
I'd be surprised if we had, but still, it's better to
No,
check.
that was me.
Right, thank you. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, can you give the inquiry your full name, please?
Malcolm Paul Rochefort.
And I'd like to thank you very much for coming to give evidence today. It's very much appreciated. If you have any difficulty understanding anything I'm saying, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. If you feel that you need a break at any time, please let us know. And if you can keep your voice up for the lady on your right who's taking a transcription of everything that's being said, that would be good. You've provided one witness statement to the inquiry. If I can take you to that, it's in a folder on your desk and it will appear on the screen. It's KIN 408838. There it is, and if we can go to page 55 of that statement, we can see there it's dated the 11th of October 2019. And is that your signature?
Yes, it is, yes.
And have you read that witness statement recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that the contents are true?
They are.
And have you discussed your statement or the evidence you're going to give with anyone before coming here today?
No.
Thank you. So just to start, I want to ask you some questions about your background. If we can go to paragraph 2.1 of your statement on page 2. Here you tell us a little bit about your background, and you tell us that you have a degree in chemistry, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
From the University of Wales, Swansea, from 1976. And you also tell us that you have a PhD in chemistry, and specifically, is it right, your thesis was on the oxidization of mixed phenolic and amino acid systems, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then between 1976 and 1994, you worked at ICI, is that right, in a variety of roles?
Yes.
And those roles included research scientist, process engineer, technical planning manager, and director of research and technology. Is that right?
Yes.
That's also in that same paragraph. And then you tell us that following those years at ICI, you joined Kingspan in 1994 as the technical development manager.
That's correct, yes.
And we understand from your witness statement that just a year later, in 1995, you were promoted to the position of technical director. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you remained in that role until your retirement almost 10 years later on the 31st of December 2004.
Yes.
2014.
2014, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
As technical director, who did you report to in the period from 2001 to the end of 2014?
That would have been, I think, Peter Wilson.
And he was the managing director of Kingspan?
Peter was the managing director, yes.
Yeah. We can look at an organogram that Mr. Heath has provided for us now. That's within his statement at KIN 30200709 on page 4. We could blow that organogram up. Now, there we can see you at the top of this structure.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? And we can see that Vincent Kopok, the Research and Development Manager, Philip Heath, the Technical Manager, and Gwyn Davis, the Technical Manager on the process side, all reported into you. Is that correct?
It did vary during our time there. I can't remember if that's the period when that was correct. There were certainly at some point during that period, this would have been correct.
Yes.
But the organisation did change, and Gwyn at one stage I know was reporting into the operations director, for example,
Yes.
rather than me.
And
So
is it-
I'm not. It's a picture of
I see, yes.
what happened.
Is it right, though, that Philip Heath did report to you until he moved on in 2010 elsewhere into the business?
That's correct. Yes.
He was the technical manager, and that Tony Millichap took his place and would have reported directly to you from 2010 onwards?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. And we also see a line here from Ivor Meredith round to you. Do you see that there?
I do. That's a dotted line. Yes.
Yes. Did Ivor have direct reporting responsibilities to you?
Not as a line manager. I think it was for technical advice and technical direction.
I understand, yes. Going back to Mr. Heath and then Mr. Millichap, how would they report to you? How regularly did you see them, and how regularly did you get reports from them?
Well, there would have been a monthly meeting. I usually held. It became to be called the technical lamination meeting, I think, because it was predominantly about that they would sometimes attend. I would get monthly reports from them.
Yeah.
Physically, they were in a different part of the site, and often both of them would be travelling for long periods of time, as I was, in fact.
Right.
So it would have been a few times a month, maybe.
Right, yeah. And is it right that Philip Heath sent you a monthly report outlining the activities of those teams under his remit?
I believe, yes. Yes,
Yeah. And those were technical services reports. Do you remember those?
I do remember them, yeah.
Yeah. Now, if we can look now on page 3, back to your witness statement, paragraph 2.5 on page 3. You explain there, you say, in my role as technical director, I was responsible for everything on the technical side. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And is it right that that included research and development, including all matters to do with the development of the manufacturing processes and the development of products?
Yes, it did, yes.
And was that for all Kingspan products, not just for K15, which we're interested in?
It was for all the Kingspan insulation products.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
And if we look at the bottom of that page, paragraph 2.6 of your witness statement, you say, my primary responsibility was to oversee the technical direction of Kingspan, concentrating on advances that could be brought in or developed that were beneficial to both Kingspan and the market, including in relation to fire, insulation performance and cost effectiveness. We can see that there.
Yes.
And is it right that you were responsible as technical director for preparing the overall budget for the technical department?
Yes.
Yeah. And is it right that it was from January 2001 onwards that the technical manager and his teams of technical advisors came to fall under your responsibility?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in respect of K15 more specifically, if we look at paragraph 4.4 of your witness statement on page 14, you say there that your overall responsibilities, it's at the bottom of that page, in respect of K15, as for all other Kingspan insulation products, were looking at that whether the product was fit for the market in respect of meeting customers' requirements, and also identifying whether there were any improvements or developments that could be made to the product. So we can see what you say there. What about looking at whether the product was fit for market in terms of fire safety? Did that also fall under your responsibility?
That would have been via the technical service team, yes. That would have been my responsibility.
Yes. Now, at paragraph 3.29 of your witness statement on page 13, you explain that you were not directly involved in the marketing of K15. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Did you play any part at all in formulating the marketing strategy for K15?
Not that I recall, no.
Right. Did you ever have any role in deciding on the content of such marketing material or product literature for K15?
No.
And who did have responsibility for that?
That would have been the head of marketing or marketing director.
And did Mr. Heath and his team also have some responsibility for that?
For the,
For deciding on the content, the technical content?
the technical content, yes, they would have had responsibility for that, yeah.
Yeah. And would you have had any oversight of them in deciding on the technical content of marketing material or product literature?
What I would have done was leave basically that area to the technical manager and their team. They were both very experienced people. Phil Heath, I think, had been with the company for 3 years before I joined. So in one sense, I was a junior to him in that respect. So they would have been responsible in terms of the detail that went into any marketing literature.
Yeah. And what about Mr. Millichap when he took over that role?
Tony Millichap had worked for Phil. In fact, I think Phil mentored him in the 90s. And I know that Tony left for a few years and then came back into Kingspan. And it was some years after he came back, he became technical manager and replaced Philip Heath.
Right, yeah. Were you ever involved in checking the technical accuracy of marketing material or product literature for K15?
I wasn't directly involved in checking the accuracy, not in terms of application.
Right, yeah. And in terms of any technical advice which was given by Kingspan to customers about the use of K15, is it right that you had no involvement or responsibility for that either?
No, I think, as I say in my statement, occasionally, quite rarely, items might be come up the chain to me that involved talking to a customer.
Yeah.
But if it was a customer on the application side, I would always feel a bit uncomfortable because I wasn't really very much knowledgeable in that area.
I see. Yeah.
I was more of a product specialist,
Yeah.
process specialist.
If you look at paragraph 4.20 of your witness statement, page 18, just picking it up, so you say there, whilst I had overarching responsibility for the technical services team by the technical manager who reported to me from 2001, I was not directly involved in any of their work, and responsibility for the technical advice given was fully delegated to the technical manager and technical services manager. So is that
That's
the
correct,
evidence?
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's consistent with what you just said. At paragraph 4.19 of your statement, which is at the top, very top of that page that we're looking at now, you say this. You say, my impression at the time was that Kingspan had a reputation for providing customers with straight and clear advice and was respected within the industry for this. Do you see that there?
Yes, I think that's true.
What period of time are you talking about there? You say, my impression at the
Well,
time.
it has to be at the time I was working for Kingspan, which was up until December 2014.
Yes. Did you take any steps at any time to check that straight and clear advice was being given by the technical teams in Kingspan?
I didn't do anything like a secret phone call or anything to check. I must confess I didn't do anything like that. But I had no reason to think that advice would be incorrect.
So
It was a well-run team as far as I could see.
how had you formed that impression that they were providing customers with straight and clear advice?
That was it's a good question in terms of how had I actually formed the opinion. I would have possibly spoken to other people in Kingspan, people in marketing department or whatever about the advice, but that would have always been my impression anyway.
I see, yeah. And what about the third-party certification of K15? Did you ever have any involvement in that? So certification by outside bodies like the BBA or the LABC?
No, not directly, no.
I I see. We might come back to look at the LABC certificate later and some emails that were sent on that. Lastly, on fire testing of K15, and in particular large-scale testing to BS 8414, if we look at paragraph 11.5 of your witness statement on page 46, you tell us in that first line, you say, my involvement in testing to BS 8414 was generally high level, and I was not involved in the day-to-day coordination of such tests. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And in the area of fire testing, can we also look at what you say at paragraph 2.7 of your statement on page 4? And if I can pick it up in the second half of the 5th line, actually, let's pick it up 4 lines down. Right on the right-hand side, there's a word beginning for, and you say, for example. So you say there, for example, in relation to fire testing for applications, other employees, through their past experience, had particular knowledge of fire testing, and so these individuals would maintain overall responsibility for these respective areas, and my involvement would be less. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes.
I want to ask you, who is it that you're referring to there? You're talking about other employees through their past experience had particular knowledge of fire testing, and they would maintain overall responsibility for those areas. Who are you talking about there?
Well, in terms of application testing, it would be people like, via Phil or Tony, it would be people like Ivor Meredith or Justin Davis or Tony Millichap in the past. And in the lab, it would have been Vincent Coppock or whoever was in the lab at the time.
Yeah. What about testing to BS 476 Part 6 and Part 7?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the tests for National Class Naught.
Yes.
Did you have any involvement in that?
Not in preparing samples or sending samples, etc. Obviously, I had some involvement in terms of a period when we were looking to improve fire properties, and work was done on the BS 476 Part 6 and 7. One of the things about that test, it was a British standard test, and at the time we were moving over, or the impression was that the country was moving over to European classification for everything. So the European standard was something that I would have been more familiar with, the single burning item test.
Yeah, the
A1,
EN,
A2, B,
yeah.
C, D, E, F.
Yeah, the EN 13501
Yeah,
classifications. I see. Okay. Now, I want to move on now to ask you about your understanding of the building regulations and associated guidance. In the period 2001 to 2010, let's take that period, did you ever receive any training in regards to the building regulations or the practical guidance in approved document B?
No.
Did you ever read the practical guidance in approved document B, which addresses external wall construction of buildings, including for over 18 metres?
I wouldn't have read it cover to cover. I might have referenced it when items are being discussed.
Right, so you don't think you ever read approved document B?
I don't think so, no.
And what about after 2010? Did you ever read it later, before you left Kingspan?
I don't think so, no.
No. You were asked by the inquiry about your awareness about the risks associated with the use of combustible materials in buildings over 18 metres in height. And if we can just look at page 19 of your witness statement, paragraph 4.26. And you say this, you say, my recollection is that because technical advisors were on the front line and often acted as a signpost in relation to the queries received, training was provided. I believe that the advisors were aware that the requirements for using all facade systems on buildings with a floor over 18 metres were more onerous because of the limitations of firefighting at heights greater than 18 metres. And they would also have been aware that further certification was required to ensure compliance with these requirements. where buildings were designed with systems incorporating K15 that met the regulatory requirements, then there was minimal risk. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And when you say there that your recollection was that they would have been aware that further certification was required, what do you mean by that there? It's 3 lines up from the bottom. They would have also been aware that further certification was required to ensure compliance with these requirements. What do you mean by that?
I think I would have been referring to the 8414, the rain screen cladding test, of which I had a little bit of knowledge because of the trade association connection. So I was aware of development work in the 90s for this, but...
Right, I see, yeah. You also say in your witness statement, this is at paragraph 6.7 at page 26, that in 2005 your understanding of the testing regime was limited. Do you see that there in the very first line?
I think I say my understanding of the BR135 testing regime was limited.
I see. So you're saying in 2005 my understanding of the BR135 testing regime was limited, and I was not aware that classification to BR135 could be sought after a successful 8414 test. So is it only in that respect that you're saying your understanding of the testing regime was limited?
It's not only in that respect, but I think particularly that I actually didn't know that a BR135 was required in that time.
Yeah.
We'd had discussions about setting up the 2005 tests, and they'd all been about the 8414 testing, so I was aware that that was going to happen, and that it was important for the market above 18 metres to get a pass in this test, but I wasn't aware that that pass was dependent on a BR135.
When did you become aware of that separate assessment process to the pass-fail criteria in BR135?
I think in terms of the pass-fail criteria, I would have relied on what was said to me by people like Ivor Meredith in terms of the requirement for the thermocouples at 600, not to exceed 600 degrees. I would have been aware of that as a primary requirement. And I would have been aware of the bits about no flaming above the above the rig at the end of the before the end of the test. So I would have been aware of those sort of things.
Yeah.
But not that BR135 was required.
Did you understand that pass-fail criteria was contained in BR135 and not in BS8414 itself?
I came to understand that later on.
And when you say later on, when?
I'm not sure exactly when, to be honest.
Yeah. And you also explain in your witness statement that, and we don't need to go to this, at paragraph 5.1 on page 21 for the transcript, that you did become more familiar with the regulations for the use of combustible materials on high-rise buildings as the market for such materials increased. Is that right?
Yes.
Actually, let's look at that. Let's look at paragraph 5.1 on page 21 of your statement, where you say there. So you say over time you came to be more familiar, and then at the end of that paragraph you say my awareness of this area included, and you've got the BS8414 Part 1 and Part 2 fire tests. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did your awareness include the fact that there was a difference between those two tests?
I understood that when the 2005 test was done, there was just the single test, the 8414, and I understood that later on another test had been developed. So they became 8414 Part 1 and Part 2, specifically for steel frame rain screen cladding systems.
And did you understand that the Part 1 test was for masonry structures?
I understood it. My thinking at the time would have been it was for non-combustible surfaces. But
yeah. And you also talk about BR135, which we've just talked about there. Can you help us, just back to that difference between parts 1 and parts 2, can you help us about when it was you became more familiar with the difference between part 1 and part 2?
Well, certainly by the time that Ivor started looking to do a part 2, so that presumably would have been sometime in, I'm trying to think, sometime in 2007, I thought.
Yeah. I see, yeah. Now, as far as you were aware, let's take your knowledge in 2005 first. If you carried out a test to BS 8414 and that system met the relevant criteria, would that allow you to use any system other than the system tested on a building with a floor above 18 metres?
I think my understanding was that if you did the test with something that was in terms of cladding, was the most vulnerable cladding system, then that would effectively that system would be suitable for anything that had a less vulnerable cladding system. So presumably, if you had something that was very thin, then that would qualify you. If it was non-combustible, that would qualify you for anything that was thicker than that. And in that way, I understood.
Where did you get that understanding from? Where did that come from?
That would have been from discussions with Ivor and possibly Phil, but certainly Ivor.
Did your understanding of that change or develop at any stage between 2001 and the end of 2014?
Trying to think if it's my understanding. I don't think it did really. I think that was still my understanding that you could qualify for something that was at the bottom end in terms of combustibility, and it would automatically the system would be acceptable for anything that was a more robust combustibility.
I see, but what are you talking about there in terms of something at the bottom end? Are you talking about the outer cladding panels?
I'm talking about the outer cladding and the whole construction, the way the construction is done. So, for example, I know there were you have fire breaks, for example. I mean, if, for example, you tested something with fire break every foot going up, then you'd require that for the system would require that if it was used in practice. And that would only qualify you for that, and anything that was used either when it was 1 foot apart or 6 inches apart. In other words, anything in the system that was changed, if it was changed in a way that was likely to make the result worse, then in that case, that would not be acceptable. In other words, it has to be the lowest point that you're testing.
When you say if it was changed in a way likely to make the result worse,
yes,
who was making those assessments about whether something might make it worse or not?
Sorry, this is my understanding. You were asking.
Right.
That was my understanding.
Yeah.
But
who would, on your understanding, who would determine whether the system was making it worse or better compared with what you tested?
Well, certainly for the initial test, my understanding was that Ivor had put that together after discussion with the BRE and come up with a system that was the most vulnerable in terms of the outer cladding, a non-combustible outer cladding.
How was that the most vulnerable if it was a non-combustible outer cladding?
No, obviously a combustible outer cladding would be much more vulnerable, so that wouldn't be acceptable. So if he's trying to pass a test that gives you acceptance for all non-combustible claddings, you choose the least robust outer cladding in order to do the test. And I think that's why this one was chosen for the 2005 test.
I see. We'll come back to that 2005 test in a little while. If we can go within your witness statement to paragraph 5.3 on page 22. you say this. You say, my understanding was that the complexity of such a large-scale fire test meant that the criteria of a BR135 classification could be somewhat subjective in the sense that decisions in respect of this classification are dependent on the skills and experience of the fire engineer who's drawing the conclusion. This means that there is a degree of reliance on people with experience in this area to make consistent decisions and to ensure that a consistent assessment is made of whether the criteria are met in each circumstances. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, when did the matters that you've set out there come to your knowledge? When did you come to understand that?
I think that was one of the fire tests that was done, possibly one of the ones in 2014.
Right, yes.
Where we had an instance where there was some dispute or disagreement between Kingspan and BRE as to whether it had passed the criteria or not.
Yes.
So that's where that understanding would have come from.
I see, yes. Would you agree with me that as you spent longer at Kingspan, you became more and more aware of the complexity of this large-scale fire testing and all the different factors that might affect whether a system passes or not?
I did, yes.
And it's not as simple, is it, as saying, well, there's a very thin, vulnerable outer skin, so we can simply, extrapolate from that and assume other systems with different skins might work, is it?
No, I agree it isn't, but I think that was our understanding at the time.
So is it fair to say that you perhaps had a more simplistic understanding of this system testing, which then developed, certainly by the time the 2014 tests were carried out?
I think that would be a fair assessment, yes.
Yeah. The matters that you've referred to there in your statement, you've said you think you became aware of this in 2014. Do we take it from that therefore you wouldn't have been aware of this, the need for, an assessment, there's a degree of reliance on people with experience in this area? Just to be clear, are you saying you wouldn't have been aware of that back in 2005?
I don't think I would have been.
No. Were you aware of these matters before you met Wintec in late 2013? We're going to come to some correspondence that shows that you were involved in a meeting with Wintec to discuss the use of K15 in the external construction of high-rise buildings. Do you think you understood that before you met Wintec?
I don't think I did. In fact, I think meeting Wintec and sitting down with them was an education for me.
I see. Yeah, well, we'll come back to that, and I'll ask you about that. I want to ask you now about the phrase limited combustibility, which is also a matter you were asked about in your witness statement. And if we look at paragraph 5.8 of your statement on page 23, you're asked the question, what was your own understanding of the meaning of the phrase limited combustibility? And you say, I can no longer recall what my understanding of this would have been during my employment with Kingspan. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you help us as to what you mean by that? I can no longer recall what my understanding of this would have been.
Well, the trouble is I am basically a scientist, so I look at figures more than systems for organising things rather than the words. So I would see a term that says limited combustibility and think, what does that mean? Now, having looked at it subsequently and tried to remind myself of the Euroclass, I see that technically it's defined in the Euroclass as an A2 would be a limited combustibility, so an A1 would be non-combustible.
Yep.
A2 is limited combustibility.
Yes.
And classes B through down to F would be combustible.
Yes.
So I understand that now, but at the time, my understanding at the time, I think I would have just looked at the phrase limited combustibility and not known exactly what was meant by it.
I see. And that knowledge of, you've just explained it by reference to the Euro classifications, how recently did you obtain that knowledge?
Well, I looked at it in preparation for this inquiry. I looked at it again and I saw a chart that said, that gave the Euro classifications and a definition beside them. And as I looked at it, I thought, oh, well, maybe I remember that, but it wasn't something that would have been front of mind at the
Right.
time, I don't think.
Whilst you were employed by Kingspan, did you understand Kingspan's range of phenolic, PIR and PUR, polyurethane insulation products, to be combustible?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think there was a range. The reason I'm qualifying this is I think there was a range of combustibility. If you look at something like a PU, PIR, that would be an E or an F generally. A PIR would be a D, and phenolic would be a C or a B.
Right, yeah. But you knew, the point I'm asking is whether you knew they were combustible insulation.
Yes, they're organic materials, so they have
Yeah.
carbon and hydrogen, and if it's hot enough, they will burn, yes.
Yeah. Did you know at any time during your tenure as technical director that the phrase limited combustibility was defined as a concept in approved document B?
I think it might have been pointed out to me, but I wouldn't have been aware of it.
When you say you think it might have been pointed out to me, why do you say that?
I think it might have been pointed out to me when it was being described, when something was being described,
Yeah,
but
okay. Did you ever become aware that there was a table at the back of approved document B where specific definitions can be found, including what tests and what criteria you have to meet to be defined as limited combustibility?
no, I wasn't.
Had you ever heard of the BS 476 Part 11 tests, which are the national test, which is relevant for limited combustibility? Either that or 476 Part 4, which is non-combustible. Were you ever aware of those tests during your time?
I can't recall being aware of the BS 476 Part 11, but I may have been and forgotten it, but I can't recall being aware of it.
Is it right that you did understand that there were more onerous requirements in the building regulations and in the guidance in the approved documents for the use of combustible insulation materials for buildings over 18 metres?
Yes. Yes, I understood that part.
And why did you think that was at the time?
I thought it was because above 18 metres, it had been described to me that the problem was the fire ladders were generally limiting at that height, and therefore, if there was a fire and if it took hold, it was necessary to make sure it couldn't progress with any rapidity up
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. I want to ask you some questions now about the test to 8414 Part 1, which was carried out at the BRE on the 31st of May 2005. If we can go to paragraph 11.25 of your statement on page 51. You say there, from my review of the contemporary documents, I can see that I was aware that an 8414 test was planned and originally scheduled for April 2005. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And we know that it happened in May 2005. And then you go on to say, you say at a strategic level, this is 3 lines down, we had identified expansion of the phenolic market as an important opportunity in 2004, and the test would have been commissioned to improve the market possibilities for K15 if the test was passed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And who's the we there? Who had identified this area as one for expansion?
I think that would have been probably the board of Kingspan Insulation, I would think.
Right. Did you sit on the board as technical director?
Yes.
Yeah. So you think it was at board level that decision was made?
I think so, yes. I
Yeah.
think that would have been...
And just to be clear, was that expansion in order to ensure a move into the high-rise market?
Yes, I think that was identified as a potential market.
Yeah. And who was it that initiated the project to test K15 in a system to BS 8414?
I can't recall who actually initiated it.
Right. Can you help us as to the way in which you understood, prior to the test being carried out in May 2005, that it would improve the market possibilities for K15? How did you think that test was going to be relevant to that?
I thought that a pass would enable us to go into that market, as I said before, with the appropriate cladding and system.
And when you say with the appropriate cladding, what was your understanding about how you were entering the market and with what?
I understood that it would be for non-combustible cladding materials.
Right, and all non-combustible cladding.
I think that would be my understanding. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and who would have told you that?
It would have been either, as we were preparing, Ivor or Phil.
Right, yeah. And had you read BS 8414 Part 1 prior to the first test in May 2005?
I can't recall whether I ever would have read it word for word. I think it would have been pointed out to me, and I probably would have seen diagrams of the test. And I think the concept would have been described to me, and I would have had some inkling of that through work that was done, as I say, in the 90s on developing facade testing.
Yeah. Are you aware that that 2005 test report has very recently been withdrawn by Kingspan on the basis that the K15 that was tested was not representative of what was subsequently sold in the marketplace?
I did see that in the opening statement, yes.
Was that the first time you were made aware of that?
Of it being withdrawn?
Yes.
Yes, it was, yes. Incidentally, sorry, the fact that it's withdrawn 14 years or 15 years after it was issued wasn't a surprise either. I mean,
Yes. Can you help us as to why it wasn't a surprise?
well, that's a long time after the test, so it would be prudent to withdraw and to retest.
Well, just to be clear, let's just look at the letter that was written on this. KIN 3024104. This is a letter from Kingspan to the BRE dated the 23rd of October 2020. And on page 1, you can see in the first paragraph, they're writing with reference to a number of 8414 test reports. And then in paragraph 2, it states, as you may be aware, Kingspan is currently involved as a core participant in the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry. As part of our cooperation with requests for information from the inquiry, we have undertaken a comprehensive review of all past and current test data, which relates to K15, including BS 8414 tests. And then it goes on in the next paragraph. Through our review, we have now concluded that the tests carried out in 2005 and 2014 featured product that was not sufficiently representative of the product currently sold into the marketplace. We have listed these reports in a small summary of their construction build-ups below. So just to be clear, Dr. Rochefort, they haven't been withdrawn on the basis that they're simply old tests and just due to their age, they've expired. They've been withdrawn because it said there the featured product was not sufficiently representative of the product currently sold into the marketplace. Do you see that there?
Yes, I think I had seen this this document, and I would have taken that to mean when they say not sufficiently representative of the product currently sold in the marketplace, that meant currently sold in 23rd of October 2020 when the letter was sent. That would have been my understanding. I may be wrong in that, but that was my understanding.
I see. Did you ever become aware after the 2005 test that the product, the K15 product, changed to become a different product?
I did, yes. I was aware of that, although at the time I am not sure I was completely clear on which product had been tested in 2005, because I think you're going to be talking about the change between what we call the old technology and the new technology.
Yes.
And for some time I wasn't perfectly clear it had been apparently old technology that was tested.
Right.
But I was aware that the new technology was introduced in late September 2006.
I see.
But of course, the changeover period had been quite a long time. It had been about 2 years.
We'll come on to that, and we'll come on to look at some documents relevant to that. just to be clear, that this letter does acknowledge that the product that was sold was not representative of the product sold since September 2006.
Where does it say
The
that?
letter goes on.
I mean, I'm sure you're right, but I can't see it saying that. That's
Okay, we'll get the reference in the letter, but that's our understanding of what's being said by the withdrawal of all these reports. I'll get the reference. Just thinking back to at the time of the 2005 test, and you've already said that your understanding, is this right, was that once you tested that system, you could then use that to say that K15 could be used in other non-combustible systems. Is that right?
That was my understanding, yes.
And again, where did that understanding come from? Did somebody tell you that?
It would have been from talking to Ivor, and I say Ivor and possibly Phil, but certainly Ivor.
Did you later come to understand that, in fact, the exact system tested would have to be replicated if you were to rely on an 8414 test?
I don't think I ever understood that the exact cladding would have to be replicated. I understood that the way the system was set up, the framing, the fire breaks, that would have to be, and the way that the product was mounted.
Yeah.
But I don't think I ever understood that it'd have to be exactly the same product,
Right.
because that would have left to an awful lot of tests.
If we go to page 2 of this letter and look at paragraph 4, starting, if you look at 2 paragraphs down, do you see it's talking about test report 220876 dated 8th of December 2005. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And it says in the second paragraph, on a full review of raw materials and the manufacturing processes, it became apparent that the K15 manufactured in 2005 would not be representative of the product currently sold on the market from 2006 to today. While both products are still phenolic foams, Kingspan is now of the view that there are sufficient differences to consider withdrawing this test report.
This is what you were referring to earlier, and I can see that now. Yes,
Yeah, thank you.
Better, yeah.
Did you read the test report for the May 2005 8414 test at the time it was received from the BRE? So that test report came in December 2005. Did you read that?
I must have done it at the time, but I can't recall it.
Did you note that the outer surface of that test was a building board or cement particle board or fibre cement board? Did you note that?
I don't think it stuck in my memory. I think I remembered it as a combustible material and as the least robust combustible material we could use in that application.
Sorry, you say there you remembered it as a combustible material. I thought you said earlier a non-combustible.
I said I'm not good with words. Non-combustible material, and therefore that would be the reason it had been used, was that it was the least robust of the non-combustible cladding materials.
How did you understand it was the least robust of the non-combustible?
Because that would have been the reason for doing the test. You're doing a test to justify being able to use it on products that are actually more robust. That was as I said before, that was my understanding of the way the test was done.
But was that an assumption you made, or was that something somebody actually told you, that it was the least robust of the non-combustible external surfaces?
That was certainly my understanding at the time, and it would have been gained from talking, as I said, talking to Ivor and possibly Phil.
Right. Are you aware that a classification report for the May 2005 test to BR135 was only issued 10 years later, so after your retirement?
Only as a result of doing background reading for the inquiry did I become aware of that, yes.
Yeah. If we could go back to your witness statement, paragraph 6.7 on page 26. So you say there your understanding was that a successful 8414 test was sufficient to show compliance of the product being tested. I did not become aware of the BR135 classification report could be obtained until later on, and I was not aware that a classification report did not exist for a system incorporating BR135 between 2005 and 2014. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can we look at KIN 3406001? So these are some emails that I want to show you first up from 2014. If we can go to the top of page 2, we see an email from Paul Ashford of the Caleb Group sent to you on the 15th of May 2014 at 6:20. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle paragraph, he makes reference to tests to BS 8414. He said he also mentioned he thought tests had been done by Kingspan in Europe on board product to BS 8414, at least for Phenolic. Do you see that there? And he asks in the final line of his email, do you have recollections of European data being available on BS 8414? Do you see that?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And then your response is in the email above that, at the very bottom of page 1, sent on the same day. You say there, back to him, we have a BS 8414 Part 1 result and have recently completed an 8414 Part 2, both on Cooltherm K15, for which we are awaiting the test report from the BRE. As you are probably aware, the BS 8414 doesn't result in a direct pass-fail, but has to be interpreted by a fire engineer or the BRE using BR135. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So by 2014, we can see that you are clearly aware that the pass-fail criteria are there in BR135, and there has to be some form of assessment to that criteria.
Yes,
You're
I
aware of
think,
that
I
then?
think, as I said, following the meeting with Wintec, I became much more aware about what was required.
So does it follow that at some point before that you must have come to learn that there was no BR135 classification report for the 2005 test?
I don't know that it looks like I'm talking about the 8414 Part 2 in this email.
Yes, I appreciate that, but I'm just trying to establish at what point before you send this email you had become aware of the need for an assessment under BR135.
Well, at least by October the 31st, 2013, which I think was the meeting with Wintec, I think that would have made me much more aware of it.
I see. And did it never occur to you to ask before that point, where's the BR135 assessment for the 2005 test?
I don't think it would have done, no.
I see. If we look at an email in the top of this chain, this is Mr. Meredith's email to Mr. Ashford. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you're copied into this. This is 21st
Yes.
of May 2014. And Mr. Meredith says, Paul, sorry for the delay. He's a week behind. And then he says, I've attached the BS 8414 Part 1 test. I slightly disagree with Malcolm's comments, though, as BR135, copy attached for information, describes the pass-fail criteria. So long as the test data supports the criteria set in the document, we can claim that it meets the criteria of BR135. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you remember reading that?
I don't, to be honest, but...
And do you
obviously I
ever
must have.
remember discussing with Mr. Meredith what he calls a slight disagreement with you about BR135 and what's necessary in terms of an assessment to BR135?
No, but I wouldn't have been surprised that Ivor didn't agree with me because he was the expert in this area. So if I'd made a mistake, I think that's probably why I copied Ivor in.
I see.
Oh, I was copied on Paul Ashford's email.
Yeah.
I think Paul was a consultant who worked for, well, he did quite a bit of work in Europe.
We can see that Mr. Meredith has attached the BS 8414 Part 1 test. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So that must have been the 2005 test, yes?
Yeah.
But it didn't occur to you at that stage to say, where's our BR135 assessment for that 2005 test?
No, it didn't, no.
Did you agree with the approach that Mr. Meredith was advocating in this email? So long as the test data supports the criteria set in the document, we can claim that it meets the criteria of BR135. He seems to be saying you don't need to have that separate assessment done. We can just claim it as long as we can see it meets the criteria. Did you agree with that?
As I said, I would have regarded Ivor was the expert in the area, so if that's what he thought, I would have assumed that that was correct.
I see. Let's go back to the period after the 2005 test had been carried out. I want to go to a monthly report for February 2006. This is a monthly technical services report, KIN 405152. Now, you confirmed earlier in your evidence that these were the reports that you would have received monthly from Mr. Heath and his team, yes?
Yes, almost certainly. What I used to do with these, I think, I would praise them usually and it'd go into a technical report for the technical department.
I see.
So I'd have one from
Yeah.
TS and one from processing
Okay.
side.
And we can see that this one's from February 06, and just to put it in context, the 8414 test report dated from December 2005, so this is a couple of months after that. If we look at page 2, in the section headed Projects, at the bottom of that page, do you see that there? It says this, BS 84141, K15 fire test is being assessed by the BRE to make full advantage of the results. Also, a next test is being discussed to see if we can cover all types of cladding and substrates. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Would you have read this report at the time?
I would have.
Were you aware at the time that the 8414 test was being assessed by the BRE to make full advantage of the results?
I would have assumed that because it was listed here that was what was happening, yes.
And what did you understand by the next sentence to mean? Also, a next test is being discussed to see if we can cover all types of cladding and substrates.
I don't think I would have known in detail what he's referring to. I presume he's referring to an 8414 Part 2, but I don't know. But it was a logical step to go from a simple non-combustible to something more complicated and test that.
What Mr. Meredith has told us, and Mr. Heath agreed with this, was that it was a programme of testing to 8414, which started with a naked test with just the installation on. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was aware of that. Yeah.
And then this next test in 2005 just had a building board on the outside, a fibre cement board or cement particle board, but no rain screen outer layer, whether that be a render or another form of rain screen system. And then it was planned that there would be another test after this to actually replicate a full rain screen system. Now, was that your understanding at the time, that this was part of a planned programme of 8414 testing?
It wasn't my understanding at the time that it was there was any need to do it on the same system. I thought that covered us for any non-combustible cladding. I would have assumed, looking at this at the time, that it was, as I said, for different types of cladding. It covers all cladding and substrates, so presumably a different type of mounting.
Well, what I'm going to suggest to you is that everybody understood at the time that 2005 test wasn't a fully representative system, and it was just one step along a planned programme of tests in order to actually get to the point of testing a full rain screen system. That's what I want to put to you.
That wasn't my understanding at the time,
Yeah.
no.
I now want to ask you about the changes to the K15 product that happened, including the change in 2006. If we go to paragraph 3.6 of your statement on page 6 of your witness statement, you say this: in or around 2003, Kingspan acquired a Dutch company by the name of Marek. The purpose of the acquisition was to use their technology to produce better insulating phenolic foam, which could be produced at a better rate of productivity. The object was to use Marek technology, also known as new technology or Kesteren technology, because of the location of the plant in Kesteren, Netherlands, for all of the Cooltherm range. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then you tell us that a programme was started to transfer the production of all products to the new technology production process.
That's correct.
For the transcript, that's at paragraph 311 on page 7 of your statement. And that included K15, didn't it? That transfer over to the new technology.
It would have been for every product we were making at the time. The intention would have been to make it with the new technology because I think, as I explained, it's a better insulating material than the new.
In terms of its thermal performance?
In terms of its thermal performance, yes.
It's a better insulating material?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in terms of timing, you tell us at paragraph 3.16 on page 9 of your statement, if we go to that the transfer process, you say it was assigned a reference, a PPDS reference. Can you help us? What was PPDS?
That was the Product and Process Development System. I introduced it, I think, shortly after I came to Kingspan. It was something I'd inherited really from my time at ICI. It was a way of looking at when you're changing products, when you're developing products for the market. It was important that everyone was involved in looking at it. That's from production, technical, marketing, sales, and that they were happy with the product, or if it was a major variation, they were happy with that.
Yeah. And you go on to say you've seen in the third line a screenshot of data that was captured through that relating to the transfer of the new tech for all phenolic products. And you then explain that this shows that this process was signed off by me in January 2006 and ultimately signed off by the operations director on the 29th of September 2006. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Can you help us as to exactly when it was that the new technology K15 was actually placed onto the market for sale? Our understanding is that it was sometime in 2006, is that right?
My understanding it was sometime in 2006. I mean, at the time, I don't think I would have been, when I wrote this, which was almost a year ago, I think, I wouldn't have been aware of that, and I had to look at a lot of background information to find out when, but I think we deduced that it was probably September 2006 that it came in.
Yeah. Now, if we can look back, picking it up at paragraph 3.7 of your witness statement, on page 6. From paragraph 3.7 onwards, you explain the difference between the old technology and the new technology.
Yes.
You say that the original Cooltherm product had tiny pores in the cells that it was made up from. This meant that over a long period of time, blowing agent in the cells would leak out or air would leak in, which could affect the insulation quality of the product.
Yes.
And then you explain the Marek technology or new technology was better because the key differences between the old and new tech were that the new tech had no pores in the cell walls, which gave better insulating properties and kept the blowing agent trapped in the product. And then you say, B, the product was quicker and more cost-effective to produce. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And you explain in your witness statement that those were the key differences. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you go on, if we look now at 310, just below that, we can see at the bottom of that page, you say this, you say both the old and new technology products are chemically very similar.
Yes.
But it's right, though, that they're not the same. Would you agree?
Ooh, they're not the same, but they were phenol formaldehyde resin products. In other words, the vast bulk was composed of a polymer between phenol and formaldehyde, and that's produced by reacting them in a controlled way in water. So at the end of that reaction, you're left with a liquid which has a lot of what's called oligomers or dimers in it, i.e. partially polymerized parts of phenolic.
Right.
And then that is then taken and converted to a phenolic solid with a catalyst, usually an acidic catalyst. But the basic constituents are the same.
Right. But is it right that a different chemical mix was used as the blowing agent, as between old tech and new tech?
Yes, if I remember by this time, I think we were using pentane in the old tech,
Yes.
at 0 ODP.
And isopropyl chloride was used in the new tech, is that right?
It was a mix of pentane and isopropyl chloride, yes.
Right. So is this right, that the old tech had used just a pentane-based blowing agent, and the new tech was a mix of isopropyl chloride and pentane?
Yes.
Right.
So the new, on that basis, the new product, that would be slightly less flammable than pure pentane.
Right. And then you say, you also explain in that paragraph that there was a difference in the base resin molecular weight and a different water content. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. It was all part of the process. I think this technology was developed, I want to say in the 1970s in the States. So it used the same general principles. You took a what's called a Resol, which was the partially polymerized phenol formaldehyde.
Yes, but what I'm seeking to get at is, although they may have been, in essence, to some extent the same, there were also differences, weren't there?
There were slight differences in the molecular weight of the original material, but when you polymerize that, you would get a very high molecular weight polymer.
And there
So
were
it'd be
differences in
essentially
terms
the
of the
same.
resin that were used.
Sorry?
There were differences in terms of the resin that was used?
The resin is the Resol, and that is purely a phenol formaldehyde oligomer, as I described.
I see. I thought we'd heard from Mr. Heath yesterday that there'd been a process of trying to ensure that the UK arm of Kingspan could replicate the same resin that had been used in Castoren
No,
when the product transferred across.
I think
Is
that's
that not right?
I think it's a misunderstanding. I think the basic Resol was very similar. As I say, there were some molecular weight differences, but the one used, this is between new tech and old tech. The Resol used in Castoren was exactly simulated for the plant at Pembridge. In other words, it was used exactly the same Resol. I think for reasons of logistics, we got another supplier to make it as an additional supplier in South Wales to produce the product. But the product itself was, we specified what the product would be. They didn't decide what it was going to be. We said what we wanted.
Yes, so you simulated it based on what was being used at Castoren, but it was not the same as the Resol which had been used in the old tech, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was actually the same company we used, and
Yeah.
we said, no, we don't want that. We want this
No.
one, which has got I can't remember if it had I think it would have a slightly lower molecular weight and a lower water content. I think
Yeah.
it was.
As far as you were aware, was there any change to anything about the faces of the product?
No, I think it was the same facing material. It was a 25 micron foil on a glass. It was adhered to a glass mat.
And was that face perforated or unperforated?
I think for the new product, it was initially it was just perforated on one side of the product, and the perforations were needed in the new process in order to facilitate the drying step
Right.
of processing, because there was always a little bit of water left in the product, and
Yeah.
it was better
Yeah,
properties if you could dry it out.
yeah.
Now, the perforations were of the order, I think, of 0.5 2.5 millimetres or less, and originally they were about 7 millimetres apart, I think, in a square section. So they would have comprised less than 0.5% of the surface area.
Right, but there were
Before.
perforations in the new technology, which there
Yes.
hadn't been in the old tech, which had been unperforated. Do you agree?
Yes, the old tech, I think,
Yeah.
was unperforated.
Yeah, and that's consistent with what we've been told by Kingspan.
Yes.
Now they've done a schedule of major changes for us, and what we've been told is it was a perforated facing.
Yes.
That's a physical change to the product, isn't it? It may not be a change to the chemical composition, but it's a key difference between the old tech and the new tech. Would you agree that it had perforations in the foil facing?
The product was very, very similar. The perforations, you weren't actually changing the facing at all. You were just, as I say, putting about 0.5%, maybe 0.8%.
Can you help us? Why did you not mention that change anywhere in your witness statement? You're giving us a very detailed explanation in your statement of all the changes. Why did you not mention the change from unperforated to perforated?
I thought I had mentioned perforations in the witness statement.
Right.
I'm not sure where, but I think I had mentioned it.
I see. Well, if I've missed that, then I'm sure someone will point that out. But can we go to the schedule that...
Incidentally, sorry, if I did miss it, that was an oversight, because I was certainly aware of the perforations were...
Yes.
But I thought I had mentioned it.
Right. Can we go to the changes spreadsheet, KIN 30222307, that Kingspan have provided to us? And it's row 7. We need the native version under the major changes tab.
It's a very tricky spreadsheet to look at, this one. I tried to looking at this.
When you say it's a tricky spreadsheet to look at,
It's just, I'm
have
sorry.
you seen this spreadsheet before?
Yes, yes, I saw this. This is part of my...
When did you see this spreadsheet?
I saw this... well, certainly it's one of the hearings this came up.
I see. Okay. Let's look at row 7, where we see the change to the new Hestia technology in, there we go, September 06. Do you see that there? On the
Yes.
left-hand side, we've got the Hestia technology. And I want to then look at column N in this spreadsheet, which gives various details about the names of particular individuals involved in considering, assessing or testing the new technology foam. And can you see, it says that the PPDS shows that Vincent Kopok, R&D manager, was the project manager. His role was to work with the Dutch manufacturer to understand the technology and bring that technology to Pembridge. And then it says this: Malcolm Rochefort, technical director, updated the status of the PPDS, confirming that fire testing was required for this project. And then Philip Heath, technical services manager, signed off the part of the PPDS to confirm that physical fire tests and certification were completed. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Now, if we can look now at your witness statement, paragraph 3.16 on page 9. You tell us there in the third line that you've seen a screenshot of the data that was captured through this PPDS process relating to the transfer of new technology for all phenolic products.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you've explained that it was signed off by you in January 06 and ultimately signed off by the operations director on the 29th of September 06, you say this process did include a section in relation to fire testing and certification, which was signed off on the 21st of February 2008 by Phil Heath, which indicates to me that fire testing was one of the requirements to be completed, and signing off would indicate that this had been completed for all affected products. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do, yes.
Can you explain to us how it came to be that the new technology product was being sold 2 years before the section of the PPDS relating to fire testing had been signed off in February 2008?
I think in this case, it would have been. You tried to get everything signed off before it went out, but in practice it was very difficult to do. And as long as the testing was taking place, then that was deemed to be, and there were no obvious problems with it. That was deemed to be sufficient. Now, in this, if I can just finish the explanation, in this case, the primary test that would have been required, I think, was for the CE marking of the product, which would have required a fire test result, and I think there was a CS1D0 on the Euroclass, and that would have been printed on the labels of the product as it went out. So I assume by this time that must have been the CS1D0 must have been on the product, and otherwise we couldn't have been selling it.
I see. You say you made that assumption about the CE marking for the product. What about other claims that were being made by the K15 product, that it was national class 0, that it had been successfully tested to BS 8414 Part 1? What about those? How can you sell a product when you haven't completed the suite of fire tests on which you are basing your marketing material?
Well, regarding the 8414 Part 1, that's not really for the product. That's for the system. So that wouldn't have been for the product.
Well, hang on. You change your K15. You've got a different product from the one you tested. Do you not accept that there then ought to have been 8414 tests with the new technology K15?
Yeah. No, I take your point there. Because that was part of it. That probably should have been part of this.
And what about the national class 0 tests of 476 Part 6 and Part 7?
I think, as I said, as far as I know, it still had the Part 6 and Part 7 result.
Were you at all concerned during that period that you were selling a product which hadn't been signed off by Philip Heath in terms of relevant fire testing?
I think with all these sign-offs, it acted as a bureaucratic system, and essentially I was the bureaucrat trying to get people to sign off and chivvy them to do it. So for that to be a late, that's quite late, but it wasn't unusual for people to take their time before they signed off on something.
But fire safety is a matter of life safety. This is not about its appearance or its thermal performance, is it? It's about life safety.
No, I agree with you absolutely there. But
did you ever think about that during that period? And did it ever occur to you that it was a potentially very unwise move to be selling a product where you hadn't signed off on the fire testing relating to that new product?
As I said, the product would have had to have the European classification, or we couldn't have sold it. So that was a necessary requirement. I think you make a valid point about the 8414, but I don't think that would have been front of mind at the time.
Or about the national class 0. It's there on all of Kingspan's marketing literature.
I believe it had, as far as I know, it had class 0.
Yes, the old technology did.
No, I think the new had. I mean, apart from anything else, if I remember correctly, you can read across from a CS1D0, and that was deemed to be equivalent to a BS476 class 0, class O.
Well, we'll come back to that topic. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment for a break.
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. Well, we're going to have a short break now, Dr. Rochefort. We'll come back at 20 to 12 and we'll see what Council has to ask you then.
Okay.
Can I ask you, please, while you're out of the room, don't discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else, please.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you very much. You'd like to go to the usher. Right, 20 to 12, please. Would you ask Dr. Rochefort to come back in, please? Right, Dr. Rochefort, ready to carry on? Thank you. Yes, Ms. Grange?
Yes, Dr. Rochefort. We were talking about the PPDS process
Yes.
in relation to the transfer over to new technology K15. Can you just help us as to precisely what steps you took before the product was first sold to market to ensure that its fire performance was equivalent and certainly no worse than old technology K15?
Well, it would have been, as I said, there was a requirement for Euro classification to sell it. So it would have been to ensure that it had the CS1D0 classification. But I wouldn't be doing that personally. I would have taken that as being a requirement on the fire classification.
Did you yourself ever check that the Euro classification had not worsened in terms of the product's performance?
Did I personally check? No, I didn't personally check, but the product would have been tested.
So does it amount to this, and is this fair, that effectively you left it to Mr. Heath and his team to determine that the appropriate fire testing was carried out as part of that PPDS?
I think Phil was responsible for fire certification on that PPDS. So yes, that's the way it worked.
But nevertheless, you were content to begin selling the product while that fire testing process was ongoing. Yes.
Yes, as I say, it would have been classified to the European classification. Otherwise, we couldn't have sold it.
Right. If we go back to your witness statement now, at page 7, paragraph 310, and I want to look again at the last 3 lines, which we didn't look at before. You say this: the differences between the products gave me no indication on a chemical level that there should be significant difference in the fire performance of the two products, particularly given that both had the same faces. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, I think we can agree now, can we, that the faces were not the same. Perforations had been introduced. I appreciate you think that's minor, but can we agree that perforations were new in the new technology K15?
As far as I recall, perforations were new, because
Yeah.
I recall there was a process by which we got a patent for pre-perforating the facing.
Yeah. So that part of your statement's not correct, is it, where you say, particularly given that both had the same faces?
Well, it's correct in the sense that they were exactly the same faces. It's just one had very, very small holes in it.
Right.
And as I say, the purpose was to dry out the water over a long period of time in an oven. So we're talking about, it would be hours, 5, 10 hours, half a day in an oven. You just need to very gently get dried out, basically.
But did you ever think about or get an assessment that looked at whether the perforations made a difference in terms of the product's fire performance?
I think as we looked into it later on with the fire focus group, I think there was quite a bit of work done on that, yes.
Yes, but why wasn't that work done before you started selling the product?
Why wasn't it done?
Yes.
As I say, because it had the Euro classification, so it would have been tested and it would have passed that. So,
right. When you say a pass, what do you mean to the Euro classification? We know there's a sliding scale.
there's a sliding scale, but
What do you mean by
that,
pass?
that product needed to be a C,
Right.
C classification, so it had, and it was a C S1 minimum smoke, no droplets.
Okay. When you say there that there should be no significant difference, you say the differences between the products gave me no indication on a chemical level that there should be significant difference in the fire performance. Can you take us through what factors led you to make that assessment and reach that conclusion?
I think probably it comes from my experience with phenolics, that they are inherently very good in fire situations because they're resistant to fire, they don't burn easily, and they give off very low smoke. And this was a phenolic. Neither of them had fire retardants added. So there was no difference in that sense. If anything, the blowing agent was slightly less flammable with the new technology. So there was nothing, and as far as I recall, the Kestrel product had CS1D0 and BS476 Part 6 and 7. So there was nothing, obviously, that meant that there would be a difference.
And when you say there that you say the products are inherently very good in fire situations because they're
Yes.
resistant to fire, they don't burn easily.
Correct.
Where did you get that information from?
I'd known that for many years. When I worked with ICI, I worked on a product for part of the time called Modar, which I think was a polyurethane acrylic thermosetting resin. And the chief competitor at the time were Phenolics, and they were used for making things like cable trays in tunnels. They're also used in Navy applications where fire and smoke are extremely important in terms of fire safety. So I would have had a very positive view of Phenolic.
I see. I appreciate you're saying that. So you're talking about a positive view both in terms of fire and smoke, or just a positive view in terms of smoke? Previously?
Fire and smoke.
Right,
Very, very
I
good
see.
in that sense.
If that was your view, why was there a need to do any further fire testing?
Well, you obviously do need to do some fire testing. I mean, as I've said, you would need to do the Euroclass to make sure that it passed that so you could sell the product.
Yeah, and you'd need to do any testing, national testing, wouldn't you, such as Class 0 or 8414 testing, if you were representing your product as having met those tests?
If that was a marketing requirement, yes, you would.
Yes. And you also make a similar point, just for completeness, at paragraph 11.22 of your witness statement on page 50, in the final 3 lines of that paragraph. You say, picking it up 4 lines up on the right-hand side, beginning both, you say both old and new technology products were basically phenol formaldehyde foams, neither containing fire retardant additives. So a significant difference in the fire performance was not expected. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Was that not expected by you or not expected by others at Kingspan?
I don't think it was expected by me or anyone else, as far as I know.
Did you consider any effects that the change in resin might have had on the fire performance when you reached that conclusion?
As I said, the resin was basically, it's the same as a phenol formaldehyde resin. It was made in the same way. The difference was the water content and the pre-polymerization molecular weight. So I wouldn't have expected any difference in resin.
Now, the new technology K15, as at 2006, had not been incorporated into any test to BS 8414, had it?
No, I don't think it had. No.
And can we agree that that May 2005 8414 Part 1 test report should never have been relied on to demonstrate compliance after that point, given it wasn't carried out on the new technology K15?
I think, again, with this inquiry and looking at the paperwork at the time, then that was a mistake. Yes, it shouldn't have been used, but it wasn't our understanding at the time.
And can you explain why that wasn't your understanding at the time? Can you explain why it was your understanding that you could carry on referring to that May 2005 8414 test, even though you knew that there'd been a change in the technology of the product since that time?
When you say carry on referring,
Yes, for many years, and we'll see it in the documents, it's that one 8414 test that Kingspan are relying on again and again and again, with the BBA, the LABC, with advice to customers, many, many times. Can we agree that given the change in technology, that shouldn't have been relied on
I think
after 2006?
I think in retrospect, it was a mistake. After, I do know that tests were carried out subsequently, and the system passed with terracotta tiling. So it wasn't, there wasn't an actual risk in fact, but I think it should have been assessed. Yes, it should have been.
When you're saying tests were carried out and there was terracotta tiling, are you talking about the July 2014 test just before?
No, I know that there was some in 2015 and 2016 tests were carried out.
Right, but you didn't know those at the time, did you? That
No,
you were
no.
selling K15 between 2006 and 2014 while you were the technical director?
No.
No. Now, moving forward to 2007 and 2008, Kingspan carried out 4 tests to BS 8414 Part 2 on a steel frame structure at the BRE in 2007 and 2008. 2 of those were carried out in December 07 and April 08 in partnership with Sotec and Metsec.
Yeah, I understand.
And 2 were carried out in partnership with Kingspan Offsite. That was in April 08 and June 08. And you were aware, weren't you, at the time that all 4 tests were failures and the system couldn't be classified to BR135?
I was aware that there was a system failure in each case, yes.
Yeah. Now, can we go to an internal report that was written by Mr. Meredith, dated the 7th of January 2008? This is KIN 408847. And just to be clear, you confirm in your witness statement, this is at paragraph 3.18, page 9, that you did receive this report from Philip Heath on the 29th of January 2008.
Correct, yes.
Yes, so you would have received this report. Did you read it when it was sent to you?
Yes, I would have read it, yes.
Let's look first at the second page of the report under the title Project Stakeholders. Do you see 3, under executive summary, 3 headings down? It says this project was run jointly between Sotec, Metsec and Kingspan with all costs split 3 ways. If it had been successful, Sotec would have included it in their LPCB approved Red Book listing. Therefore, K15 would have got into the Red Book. And then in the next paragraph, it says this information is essential to Kingspan for all facade sales above 18 metres throughout the UK and Ireland. Not having evidence that our product performs onto a steel frame is causing job losses specifically in Scotland on a daily basis. However, we are fighting the case for each project with the BS 8414 Part 1 onto masonry test data performed in 2005. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And do you remember being aware of that at the time when you
Yeah.
received the report?
Yes, that was my understanding, that if we wanted a steel frame construction, then it was important to carry out the 8414 Part 2.
Yeah. What did you think he meant by, however, we are fighting the case for each project with the 8414 onto masonry test data? What did you understand him to mean by that?
I would have assumed that what he was talking about was where there were constructions that were masonry or a non-combustible substrate, that the product was acceptable.
I see. So you didn't read that any more broadly. We are fighting the case for each project with that. So you assumed, did you, that you were only fighting the case for masonry projects? Was that your understanding?
That was my understanding, yeah.
I see.
I mean, well, however masonry is decided, I would have seen masonry as a non-combustible cementitious base. Or
Is that because
something
you're
like that.
referring to the fact that Kingspan goes on to advise its customers that as long as the K15 has a non-combustible substrate behind it, you can use it even in a steel frame system? Is that why you're saying that?
That wasn't my understanding at this stage. Would have been that it was actually on a wall that was a masonry wall or a cementitious wall anyway.
Yes. And was it your clear understanding at this point that that was the only basis upon which K15 could be used over 18 metres, where there was a masonry wall behind it?
Where there was a non-combustible masonry, cement, concrete, brick wall behind it, yeah, that would have been my understanding.
Yeah. Now, if we can look at the bottom of this page under the heading Results. we can see there it says, by 17 minutes the top fire barrier had breached and the raging inferno moved up to the top thermocouples and pushed them past 600 degrees, thus failing the simple criteria of BR 135. And then you're told at the bottom there, BS 84142 does not have a pass or fail. It needs to be cross-referenced with BR 135. So just pausing there, can we agree that by the time you read this report, you would have been aware that BR 135 contained the pass-fail criteria?
I would have been, yes.
Yes.
From that reference, yes.
Yeah, so this is January 2007. And then we go over to page 3 where we get more details.
Sorry, this is January 2008, I believe, isn't it?
No, it's 2007. Sorry,
No, I
it's
think
2008.
I believe it's
I beg your pardon.
2008, yeah.
Yes, sorry, the test was in 2007. And then if we look over the page, there we go, at the top, it says this: the phenolic was burning on its own steam and the BRE had to extinguish the test early because it was endangering setting fire to the laboratory. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And then he says, under why did it fail? The new technology phenolic is very different in a fire situation to the previous technology, which has passed several similar tests. The old technology would turn into a light ash and fall away, leaving the substance to feed the fire. And then he says, please refer to archive test pictures 47 and 48, which clearly shows this. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yes.
Now, it's clear from what he says there, isn't it, that what had been tested previously, and he's included photographs in this report of that 8414 report, was old technology, K15, yes?
In retrospect, I can see that that's true. Whether it occurred to me immediately at the time, I don't know, but I would say that was referring to old technology. I mean, he makes the point.
Well, you told us earlier this morning that you weren't aware whether the 2005 test was done on old technology or new technology, K15. Would you agree that upon receiving this report...
Oh, yes, on this report, yes, I would have. This would have certainly alerted me to the fact that it was old technology.
Yes, and he's even included pictures giving a comparison of the 2005 test with this test.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
The pictures, if looking at the pictures, wouldn't tell you whether it's old technology or new technology. It's his wording would...
Well, it's this wording. He says the old technology would turn to a light ash and fall away, leaving the substance to feed the fire. Please refer to archive test pictures, which clearly shows this. That's very clear, isn't it? He's telling you that in those pictures you can see old technology.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't... What I was referring to was the fact that just looking at the pictures wouldn't tell you it's old technology. From Ivor's description here, that's clearly what he's trying to tell you.
Yes, and I would say he's not just trying to tell you, it's very clear what he's telling you in that paragraph. Would you agree?
I think he's referring to the archive pictures and as a way of illustrating his point, yes.
Yes. Now, it's clear from those observations, just pausing there, that Mr. Meredith considered the performance of the K15 to be, the new technology K15, to be a matter of significant concern. Do you agree?
I agree, although he did come up with some other possibilities as to what could be causing the problem.
Were you concerned when you read this report, Dr. Rochefort?
I was concerned when I read this report because it was the first really negative report I'd seen on new technologies, on a test involving new technology.
Did you have any basis on which to disagree with his assessment there, that the new technology phenolic is very different in a fire situation to the previous technology?
In this test, I don't think that shows that. I think he's saying... Sorry, it's very different in a fire situation. I've just reread his words. In the sense that it's very different in a fire situation, and he's illustrating it with those pictures, it would show that there is a difference in the performance, yes.
Yes, and it's in the performance of the phenolic. He's not just highlighting that a different system has failed, is he? He's saying the new technology phenolic is very different in a fire situation, and he actually gives you a description of how he's seen that difference. It doesn't turn to light ash and fall away. Do you see that there?
I do see that, but this is a different system. It was, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was an aluminium cassette. And that in itself would perform differently to the cementitious product that was used on the original test. And I think that is also discussed in his report as a possibility for how it turned out differently.
You're right, it is a different system, and he does discuss the differences in the system in this report. But can we also agree that he is highlighting that in his assessment, and you've said before that he's one of the experts within Kingspan who, was day-to-day involvement with this, his assessment was that the phenolic itself performed very differently, having observed that test. Can we agree on that?
Yes, I think the purpose that Ivor wrote this report, and this is his report, it's not from the BRE as I understand it, was to make us sit up and take notice that there was an issue here.
When you say it's his report, not from the BRE, are you saying that you weren't aware of observations that were made by the BRE about the performance of the phenolic foam at this time?
I didn't have any direct contact. I think later on in the report he does refer to off-the-record conversations with them.
Yes, it does. We'll come to those in a moment. Did you ever study any of the photographs that he refers to in the report?
I think I would have at the time, although I wouldn't remember them now.
Did you carry out the exercise of comparing and contrasting the photographs from the two tests?
I probably would have at the time, but I can't recall that.
Did you watch the video recording of that December 2007 test?
Again, I can't recall if I saw that. I know I have seen an 8414 test at some point, but I can't recall if it was a video or actually whether I was present or not.
We go to page 3 now. We'll come back to this page in a minute, but I want to look at what he says at page 3 in the second paragraph. Sorry, we've just looked at that. Yes, sorry. If you go further down page 3, it's 2 paragraphs up from the bottom there. Can you see it's beginning perforations? Do you see he says this? Perforations in the phenolic foil faces have caused a reduction in the Euro class when tested in the SBI single burning item. And then he says loss of the perforations may help. Do you see that there?
I do see that, yeah.
So can you see that he's clearly telling you his view that perforations have caused a reduction in the Euro class when tested to the single burning item tests?
As far as I know, the product still had the same Euro class, CS1D0, so I'm not sure that's correct, but it's one of the hypotheses that Ivor puts forward.
Well, you told us earlier that you hadn't expected there to be any change in the fire performance. Do you agree that he's telling you here it has caused a reduction in the Euro class? On what basis did you have to question that? You're not involved day to day in the testing, are you?
No, but I know that the product couldn't have been sold if the Euro class had been lower than CS1 D0. So
were you concerned?
He might be talking about some tests that were carried out separately, some development tests.
Well, he might be, he might not be. But were you concerned when you read that the perforations have caused a reduction in the Euro class when tested in the SBI? Did that concern you?
I think if I remember correctly, when looking at this, there were a number of possible things that could have gone wrong, and that was certainly one of them that could have caused the problem. So it had to be looked at.
It's not, with respect, he's not saying it's a possibility, is he? He's saying have caused a reduction in the Euro class.
I know he's saying that.
Definite language, isn't it, that he's using?
Yeah, but I don't know where he's getting that from.
Let's look below this on page 3. We touched on this already, that there are included in Mr. Meredith's report some comments from the BRE. Do you see that there in the middle of the page? And it's saying, comments from the BRE, the official line, it's a system failure. No individual component can be solely held responsible for the failure. However, unofficial comments, it was apparent that the insulation was fully involved in the test. Surface spread of flame was apparent and the core continued to burn when the flame source had been extinguished. They stated they did not remember the product performing like that last time. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you disagree with those unofficial comments from the BRE?
I couldn't agree or disagree. I wasn't present at the test, so that was their opinion.
Were you concerned when you read this report that not only was it Mr. Meredith's assessment that the insulation had performed badly, but also the BRE's assessment that it continued to burn when the flame source had been extinguished?
I think, assuming that was correct, then clearly that would be of concern. And I don't want to belittle this report. It was quite a dramatic report, and I think we took notice of it and said, "Hang on a minute, what's going on here?" So it wasn't that we ignored it completely.
When you said, "Hang on a minute, what's going on here?" what action did you actually take on the back of this report?
Well, if I remember correctly, there were a number of other 8414 tests planned. So the plan was to see if we got the same performance, because it was distinctly possible that this was a result of the system being tested rather than the product, and that it may be possible to get a pass with another test.
I see. Did you give any consideration upon receipt of this report to stopping sales of K15, certainly for buildings over 18 metres, given how it was described by the BRE and by Mr. Meredith in this report?
Not on this one, but I think after another test I did. I think there was another test in April, and I think I said something at that one that I was concerned, and should we go back to the old technology if that was causing the problem.
When you say if that was causing the problem,
I have to say that.
what led you to think that it might not be causing the problem, given what's said here in these comments?
Because it's a system test, and if the system fails in such a way that it lets more air in, I mean, you need oxygen for a fire, and you need something that can be oxidised. So if it's failing in such a way that lets more air in than would with a rigid non-combustible cladding, then clearly that could be a system problem, or if there were other issues with the system that caused
Dr.
problems.
Rochefort, one of the things you're being told here, and we'll see it in some later reports, is you're being told that the core continued to burn when the flame source had been extinguished. How were you in a position to be able to explain that away on the basis that it was a system test?
No, I'm not explaining it away in that. What I'm doing is looking at possibilities that could have happened, and you've got effectively a chimney in the gap between the insulation and the cladding, and as I say, it is phenolic like any organic material. It's got carbon, hydrogen, and it will react with oxygen, and at a sufficient temperature. Once the temperature is reached,
Right.
it will burn.
So is it your evidence that upon receiving this report, you thought to yourself, well, this is a system test, there could have been all sorts of reasons for this, therefore we can carry on selling K15 at this time?
My thought would have been this is a system test. There were quite a few reasons why it may not be a product issue. Obviously, it started in my mind, the thought, we need to keep an eye on this.
Right. We go back to page 3, two paragraphs up from the. Sorry, it's on this page. 2 paragraphs up from the BRE comments. Can you see? Mr. Meredith said this. In all honesty, from what I have seen, the way the phenolic burned is of the most concern. Therefore, we need to add a fire retardant, which could also help us get class 0. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
So, do you agree that Mr. Meredith could not have been clearer how concerned he was about the performance of the phenolic itself?
Oh, I think I definitely was concerned. We knew that, yes.
Yes. And that statement that therefore we need to add a fire retardant which could also help us to get class 0. You told us in your witness statement for the transcript, this is a 320 on page 10, that you don't understand this comment. My understanding is that we did have Class 0 on both old and new technology.
That's correct. I think we did have Class 0 on old and new technology.
Well, would you agree that what Mr. Meredith's telling you there is that you haven't got Class 0 for the new technology at this time? Why would he be writing that if you already had Class 0?
I don't know, but I think what he might be referring to is there were some tests done with the product and facing that didn't get Class 0, so I think he's referring to that.
Yeah, you've just said tests done with the product and the facing, i.e. tests done of K15 as it's sold with the foam and its facing, and you're saying it didn't get Class 0.
I understand that's what he's probably talking about there.
Yes. Did you ever check and speak to your colleagues in the marketing department and say, by the way, we haven't got Class 0 for the new technology, we're struggling to get it, please don't include that on what we're saying about its fire performance? Did you ever say that as technical director to them?
As far as I understand, the product had Class 0 by dint of surface spread of frame and fire propagation, and it was allowable on the surface material.
Okay, how is what Mr. Meredith's written there consistent with that understanding?
He's obviously thinking about a different test.
What different test?
It would be a test with the product with the facing on it.
Well, isn't that your product that you're selling?
As far as I understand, the Class 0, and remember that this was not something that the product was required to meet, but as far as I understand, that was acceptable if the surface material had a Class 0.
Okay, but I'm asking you about what Mr. Meredith's telling you here. He says, which could also help us get Class 0. Does that not tell you that you don't have it at this point?
It certainly implies that we don't have it at that point.
Yeah. And did you understand him to mean that in order to get it, you would need to add a fire retardant to achieve Class 0?
I think, as I say, the phenolic foams did not have fire retardants in them and did not normally need a fire retardant. I think it's a possibility that he wants to look at, and I think we did look at the various fire retardants later on.
We know that there was a technical meeting the next day after this report was delivered. So on the 30th of January 2008, if we can go to the minutes of that meeting, it's KIN 3022466. We can see this is a technical meeting, lamination minutes. Do you see that there? 30th of January 2008, Pembridge.
Yes.
And we can see that you're present. Do you see that there? In fact,
Yes,
it looks
yes.
like you've taken the minutes.
I've taken the minutes for this one, yeah.
Yes.
I think we rotated the minutes on these.
Yeah. And do you see under urgent topics for discussion, under item 1.1, phenolic fire performance?
Yes, it says METSEC facade test failure, though mineral wool also
I'm sorry,
failed with its
Mr.
cladding.
Sorry, Dr. Rochefort, can you just let me finish? It says that in item 1, but I want to ask you about little bullet 3 there. It says BS 476 part 6, still elusive for certain formulations. Look at deep TEP Exolit OL 920. Do you see that there?
No, I don't actually.
So under phenolic fire performance, the first sentence...
Oh, bullet point, sorry. I was looking for a number.
is
three.
METSEC for tar test. Failure, then I am concerned on reproducibility of lab test. And then BS 476 part 6, still elusive for certain formulations. Do you see that there?
Yes, I see that now.
And then he says, look at deep TEP.
Yep.
So what did you understand him to mean what did you mean when you wrote these minutes? BS 476 part 6, still elusive for certain formulations.
That for certain formulations it was still elusive, therefore something needed to be looked at.
Yeah, and did you appreciate at the time that BS 476 Part 6 was a key part of national Class 0 testing?
Yes, I would have understood that, yeah.
And then look at DEEP, TEP, etc. Are those fire retardants to be added?
DEEP is a fire retardant, TEP is a fire retardant, the Exolit OL 920 is a fire retardant. ATH is an alternative mineral in place of the calcium carbonate, which is added to neutralise the acid, and boric acid would have.
So are we agreed that they're all some kind of fire retardants to try and help with the BS 476 Part 6 test?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you state in your witness statement that you didn't know that new technology K15 did not have Class 0, yet you were present at this meeting where it was discussed, and you took the minutes which clearly record that Part 6 was elusive. Can you explain why you've said in your witness statement you didn't know that new tech K15 didn't have Class 0?
I think what I said was that the Class 0, the product always had Class 0, and it was acceptable to test the facing material and get a Class 0 that way. That was acceptable. I think what this is concerned about is there an issue around the foam itself, the foam facing combination.
When you say you thought it was acceptable to test the facing material and get a Class 0 that way, is that you referring to the fact that Kingspan do some tests on just the foil facer alone, not with the foam attached, and claim Class 0 on the basis of that testing?
Yeah, I think those were done in, 2007, I think they were done.
And you thought that was acceptable, did you?
That was acceptable for the BS 476 Part 6. That was a way of getting.
Did you ever
Part 6 and
check
Part
BS
7.
476 Part 6 and check whether it says clearly in that standard that the test must be carried out on whatever substrate is used in the end use conditions? Did you ever check that for yourself?
I didn't check personally, no.
No. Did you ever ask anybody else to check the BS 476 Part 6 standard to ensure that that was an appropriate way of carrying out that test?
That was my understanding, that it was an appropriate way.
Right.
That's why it was used.
Now, if we go to paragraph 322 of your statement, at page 11, you tell us in the final 5 lines of that paragraph that, if just picking it up, you say 5 lines up, but given these concerns, testing, such as indicative calorimeter tests on both new and old technology products, continued with Ivor Meredith and Philip Heath's team to understand the fire performance of the new technology product and clarify if improvements were necessary. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you approve that course of action to carry out further testing to understand the fire performance of the new technology product and clarify if improvements were necessary?
Yes.
So is it right that there was a significant enough concern about the fire performance of the new product to require investigation by way of further fire testing?
Well, I think this is certainly partly a result of the test result from the previous day, if that's what it was, that there was a concern.
How did you satisfy yourself as technical director that it was safe to continue to sell the product at a time when you were undertaking testing and investigations to find out whether the fire performance of the new technology product required improvements in terms of fire performance?
Well, I think this is a logical way of looking at ways that the product can be improved, and anything that would have been developed could have been used in the future.
Did you, as technical director, ever give consideration to taking K15 off the market, or certainly off the market in terms of over 18 metre sales?
I think certainly later on, I'm saying, we I'm just trying to certainly that we looked at the possibility of moving back to the old process. I think I actually recommended that at one point.
I'm asking you at this stage, you've decided you're going to carry out some more tests to understand the fire performance. You've had a report from Mr. Meredith that expresses his concerns in the strongest possible terms. Did you at any stage give consideration to taking K15 off the market, or certainly off the over 18 metre market?
I don't think personally I did. Well, I'll rephrase it. I think I certainly considered moving back to the old process at this stage. I think testing carried on. I think the intention was to come up with a product that was obviously more had a better fire performance, if that was possible.
And who did you tell anybody that you were considering going back to the old process? Who did you communicate that to?
I communicated that on a couple of emails, I think. It's
Right. Can we look at the monthly activity report prepared by Mr. Meredith for the period 4th of April 2008? This is at KIN 403698. So this is Mr. Meredith's monthly report for April 2008. Can you remember reading this report at the time?
I must have read it at the time. I can't remember now having read it, but I must have, I presume. Did this definitely come to me?
Can we tell? We can't tell for sure that it did come to you.
Yeah, I can't
That's
remember
why
it, but
we're asking you.
it's likely I did, but
Yeah.
normally these reports went to... was this a tech service report is this from? Or was it a report just internal for the technical department?
It seems to be a monthly activity report.
Right. I probably saw it, is all I can say at the moment.
If we look in the third bullet point here, it says this: indicative calorimeter tests on new K15 versus old have shown a quicker time to ignition and double the heat output for the newer product, thus confirming initial suspicions in respect of reaction to fire. Do you see that there?
I do. Yeah, that's Ivor's wording, isn't it?
Now, sorry, can I ask? Now, those would be, wouldn't they, the results of the tests undertaken to understand the difference in fire performance between old and new technology. Do you agree?
I'm not sure I'm not sure what that indicative calorimeter test was actually. The wording's a bit odd in that a calorimeter normally combusts the whole of the product that's being tested. So if you were to put in a piece of foam that weighed so many grams and test it, the total heat output would be the same if the foam was of the same weight. Doesn't matter what the fire performance of it is. So the fact that there was double the heat output suggests to me that you had double the amount of material, if that's correct. It's an odd result.
Right. Did you go back to Mr. Meredith and say to him, this is an odd result? Can you explain this to me? What test have you done? How have you got to the conclusion that it's quicker time to ignition and double the heat output? Did you do that?
I think I would have done if I saw this. I honestly don't know if I did see this or not, but I would have done.
So you can't remember ever being aware that further investigations had shown a quicker time to ignition and double the heat output? Were you never aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that, and it doesn't make sense, as I say, because the same amount of material should give the same heat output. So I think you'd need to see the actual test result to draw.
Would it make sense if one read it as meaning double the rate of heat output?
It could do, yes. That is possible. That's what he meant.
Could it have been bomb calorimeter tests that were being carried out by Mr. Meredith at this time?
That's what I'm assuming. And bomb calorimeter normally combusts the entire item, so you would get a complete calorific value for the whole item.
Did you have that level of knowledge about the testing system at that time? Is that your evidence?
I knew a lot about things like bomb calorimeter. I knew from previous jobs.
Right.
That sort of thing I would have known about. It's not specific to insulation testing.
So your evidence is you're not sure whether you saw this, and if you did see it, you think it's a bit odd, yes?
I think it's a bit odd, and I think I would have questioned Ivor about it at the time, but I don't recall Ivor doing that.
Let's go now to the Technical Services Department monthly report for July 2008, which is exhibited to your witness statement. And if we go to paragraph, actually, let's start to paragraph 3.21 of your statement on page 10.
Yes.
You say there, 4 lines up from the bottom, I can see from the Technical Services Department monthly report from July 08 that there was a workshop held with METSEC to discuss the challenging fire requirements of high-rise facades. Do you see that there? In the last
Yes,
4
I'm
lines?
just reading it at the moment.
I can see from the Technical Services Department monthly report from July 08 that there was a workshop held with METSEC to discuss the challenging fire requirements of high-rise facades. And then you say, it appears, therefore, that the concern was in relation to the system that was tested as opposed to a particular issue with K15. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Is that a conclusion that you reached recently or something that you actually concluded at the time? That the concern was in relation to the system tested as opposed to a particular issue with K15?
I think this was a conclusion I reached a year ago, having read the information that I was shown from the tech services report, etc. So I don't know what I would have thought at the time.
I see. Let's look at that technical services report now for July 08, KIN 408848. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And this is a report you exhibit to your witness statement. And if you go down on page 2 under the heading Projects, we see that it says this. A sample of the OP90 fire retardant phenolic has been sent to the BRE for indicative calorimetry testing. We hope to find a lower calorific output and slower time to ignition. A product with these characteristics is required to maintain our position in the high-rise facade market above 18 metres. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So, regardless of whether you saw the earlier report from Mr. Meredith, do you agree that once you saw this report, you knew that there were problems around the calorific output and time to ignition of the new product?
Well, again, this is the same test that he's hoping to do calorimetry testing on, so I don't know that that was specifically the issue. I think he's highlighting that there might be an issue with K15, and his final sentence is, a product with these characteristics is required to maintain our position in the high-rise facade market. I would have tied that in with the next paragraph where he's talking about a BS 84142 test.
When you say I would have, Dr. Rochefort, are you giving us the evidence as to what you would have thought when you read this, or are you giving us an analysis now that you've come up with?
I don't know what I would have thought when I read this at the time.
Well, what I'm suggesting to you is that you certainly would have been aware at this time that there was a problem in terms of calorific output and time to ignition. Otherwise, why were you sending a fire retardant sample for indicative calorimetry testing? Do you agree?
I believe it's either sending this sample in to the BRE.
Yes.
So I think it's part of an investigation. It's a normal part of investigation that you would do.
But then that sentence at the end, as you've already highlighted, a product with these characteristics is required to maintain our position in the high-rise facade market above 18 metres. It couldn't be clearer, could it? You haven't got a product that satisfies those requirements, and you're having to do this work in order to identify a product that can maintain your position in that market. Do you agree?
I don't think it necessarily says that. I think he's saying that how I would have taken that is one way of looking at the approach to the 8414 Part 2 and to test a product with if it's got improved fire characteristics.
Can you
As a result of
explain
it.
how you understood that sentence at the time? What did you understand it to mean? Forget what he might have meant by it. What did you actually take from that? A product with these characteristics is required to maintain our position in the high-rise facade market above 18 metres. What did you understand by that?
I would have understood that he's looking for a product with improved fire performance, as he said.
Well, let's read the next paragraph. He says, a BS 84142 test is being planned for August if the OP90 product shows beneficial characteristics. And then he says this, a definite increase has been seen in TS, technical services, inquiries,
Yeah.
questioning phenolic suitability for use over 18 metres. Do you see that?
Yes.
So what I put to you is that when you read that paragraph with the one above, you could have been in no doubt that you didn't have a product that could satisfy that over 18 metre market, and questions were being asked about the suitability of K15 for use above 18 metres.
I don't think that's true. I think what we didn't have was a system test to 8414 Part 2 that passed. That's what we didn't have.
But all of
This
this
was-
work over a fire retardant version of K15, do you not agree that that was because you didn't have a K15 product that you thought could pass as part of a system test because you'd seen it perform so badly in the 2007 test?
I think that was one possibility. The other possibility was that the test itself was, in some way, causing the failure. The setup of the test.
Well, what
So we're
conclusion
investigating-
did you reach at the time?
Sorry.
What
Sorry,
conclusion
had you finished your answer?
No,
You've now forgotten that, I'm sorry.
I'll ask. I've lost my track
Yeah.
now. So sorry. Please,
Sorry,
please
I'm-
ask the question.
What conclusion did you reach at the time upon reading this?
That he was. I mean, just what I said. He wants an 84114 part test with the AP920 as one of the ways that we're looking at to improve to get a system that works.
And what did you understand him to mean when he says a definite increase has been seen in technical services inquiries questioning phenolic suitability for use above 18 metres?
Again, I don't know what I would have thought, but I would have. I mean, looking at it now, it looks like he's saying that there is some concern because presumably someone's heard about the failures in April and December. That's how I would have read that.
Were you aware at the time that K15 was being marketed as suitable for use over 18 metres?
As far as I was aware, it was being marketed for use above 18 metres on a masonry or cementitious substrate.
Right. Now, moving on, the two tests were then carried out with Kingspan in partnership with Kingspan offsite at the BRE on the 9th of April and 6th of June 2008. And again, neither system after testing could be classified to BR135, could it? They were failures.
Can you just give me the dates again? Sorry?
Yes, sorry, that was April and June 2008. These were the Kingspan offsite tests, or the ones in partnership.
Yes. No, I remember
With
those.
Kingspan offsite. And I want to ask you about some correspondence in the days after the second unsuccessful test on the 6th of June 2008.
Yep.
If we could go to KIN 403704 and I look at the bottom of the email chain at the bottom of the first page. So this is Mr. Meredith to you and Vincent Coppock and copying in Philip Heath and Gwyn Davis. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And he says this, Malcolm Vincent, the question of K15's bad fire performance is no longer just an internal one. It would seem offsite had a very dramatic test failure. Therefore, I need to know how soon I can have samples of the OP90 phenolic for business critical R&D. And he goes over the page. He says, once I've reviewed the information, I will provide a more comprehensive report later. However, the attached picture shows the most recent K15 test performed by Offsite and K15 burning under its own steam 10 minutes after the test was put out. Offsite are gravely concerned that we are selling something that doesn't do what we say it does. And then he says, to validate the new product from a fire point of view, I would need samples of the following sizes. And one of the things he asks for there, do you see 2 items down, is a Part 6 test.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yes.
at the end, he says, in respect of using just one perforated side on the structural foil-faced phenolic foams, it was agreed at the meeting that this could happen. But how do we put it in place and make sure it happens? Is this a PPDS situation? Does anyone know the cost implications? Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you accept that it was clear from this email that K15's bad fire performance was a matter which was known internally within Kingspan?
I accept that the bad performance in these tests was known, yes. But we've
And it had
discussed that.
performed in a similar way, hadn't it, to the tests in 2007, 2008, which had also been failures in terms of carrying on burning under its own steam.
It looks like they're similar. I think they were different products, but I think it was different thickness involved in this. But
I see. Is that what you thought at the time, that you put that down to different thicknesses?
no, I don't think I put it down to it. I think this was part of an effort to try and make sure we had a system that worked for 8414 Part 2. And how do we get that? That was what the investigation was about.
Looking at that top paragraph on that page where he's put K15 burning under its own steam in bold,
Well,
are you sure that you took from this that it was just you didn't have a system that worked for 8414 Part 2, as opposed to being aware that there were concerns about K15 itself?
if I can just take a little bit of a side issue here. When we tested the product in the laboratory, we ran a blow lamp against the product. That was how we tested different formulations, etc. And for 10 minutes. And generally, K15 would not burn through in that time. And when you turn the blow lamp off, it would not carry on burning. So, I mean, that's the sort of fire-resistant product it is. So when it's burning under its own steam, that says to me that the temperature reached and the supply of oxygen is such that we've got conditions for it burning. As I said before, that can be a result of the way the test is set up. So, yes, it could be a product issue, but it's the system that's failing.
When you say when we tested the product in the laboratory, we ran a blow lamp against it, etc., and you say that on the basis of that, K15 would not burn through. When did you do that test?
We did that all the time. That was a standard. Sorry, when I say standard test, it wasn't a standard test. It was one we did regularly in the laboratory, looking at samples.
Why do we see no reference to that in any of Mr. Meredith's emails?
Ivor wasn't in the laboratory. He was several buildings away, as far as I know.
Why do we see no email back from you to Ivor saying, you've got this wrong, we've been testing this and it doesn't burn under its own steam, we've tested it under laboratory conditions, it does this, this, this. Why do we not see that anywhere in the documents?
Ivor may be aware of that. I mean, he's talking about a particular problem here with the 8414 Part 2 test, and I'm not going to dispute the fact that he's seen it performing that way in that test. What I'm saying is that that's not a normal behaviour of K15.
Is there any documentation around these other tests that you did in the laboratory which you say disproved this?
If I can rephrase that, I'm not saying it disproves this, because I did say that given a sufficient supply of oxygen and enough temperature, it could burn under its own steam. What I'm saying is that in a normal test result, I didn't have any real concern about the performance of the product as in that sense. It didn't easily burn under its own steam.
Did this email...
Sorry, can I just ask, isn't there a difficulty here that you're describing the performance of this material under laboratory testing conditions?
Yes.
Mr. Meredith is describing the performance of the product under conditions which are intended to replicate use in practice, the chimney, availability of oxygen from the surrounding atmosphere, so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So it's not really possible to say this isn't normal, is it? It's all you can say is this does not reflect what you found in the laboratory, but it may be normal for the way it performs under something approximating to actual use in a building.
Clearly, it seems to be doing it in this particular test. So you'd have to say that is happening in the 8414 Part 2
Yeah, and then
systems that have been set up.
Yes, and this was at least the second such test of this kind, because you'd had the one at the BRE.
Yeah, I think we'd had. It might have even been the third or fourth.
Right. So it's starting to generate a pattern of normality, one might perhaps say.
It's certainly of concern, which is why work is being done on the fire retardant possibilities.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yeah. When you say it's certainly of concern, were you concerned at the time about the use of K15 on buildings over 18 metres, given what this large-scale fire testing was showing?
I wasn't, which the reason I wasn't was my understanding was it was being used against a masonry substrate per what had happened in the 8414 Part 1 test. That was my understanding of how it was being used. This, as I saw it, was a different test. This was a steel frame test. There's a possibility that you can get oxygen into it in a different way. So it was a different test. So I wasn't concerned that what was going out there and what was being recommended was a problem. But clearly we needed to pass this test if we were to get that was my understanding,
Yeah.
if we were to get the steel frame business.
But the masonry test you've just referred to was on a different K15 product, wasn't it?
It was on, as we now know, on the old technology product.
Yes.
Which is why I say, should we try the old technology product and see how that performs in the test?
Did you understand why Ivor was asking, is this a PPDS situation? Can you understand why he was asking that?
I would imagine if we had to put a fire retardant in, it would be a PPDS situation. So,
I see. Moving up the email chain, we can see you responded 5 minutes later at 9:42 on the 9th of June 2008. And you say this, please expedite this trial. Ivor, if you're confident that old process will pass the test, we may have no choice but to provide old process K15 for off-site until the FR issue is sorted out. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, did you mean by that you'd have no choice until you'd sorted out this, but to provide old technology K15 to off-site for the further tests that they'd got coming up?
Anything we provided to them for a test would have to be used. If that's whatever performed in the test would be what you had to sell. That would be normal.
So what did you mean when you said we may have no choice but to provide old process K15 for off-site until the FR issue is sorted out? Are you talking there about providing it to off-site for their testing?
No, it's providing it, and if it passed, the implication there is okay. It's shortened, but the implication is provide it to off-site for the test. If it succeeds in the test, then you would obviously provide that, carry on providing that. Now, if we move to off-site, you'd have to do the whole K15 because I don't think you can't distinguish one from the other. So every K15 product you made would have to be old technology. Hence, I say that I know it's a nightmare for processing, switching between the two technologies. And I'm saying we can't carry on providing something with no fails a fire test. That's self-evident.
Yeah, so I think you explained this in your witness statement, which we'll come to. you're saying that this email shows that you were worried about providing K15 to market. Is that your evidence?
Yes, if this was the cause of the problem, if it fails a fire test.
What I'd suggest to you is there's another way this email can be read, which is that what you're proposing to do is go back to providing old process K15 to off-site just for their testing until you've sorted out what you're going to do about the new technology K15.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant if you provide old process K15, you'd have to provide it. That would have to be the product you're providing. When I say until the FR issue is sorted out, what I mean is if a fire retardant is the answer, then in the future you can go back to new technology with that fire retardant.
Well, I'd suggest to you that a more natural reading of this email is exactly as I just put to you, that what you're saying is we've got no choice but to provide off-site with some old process K15 for their testing until we can sort out what we're doing with the new technology K15. And although that's a nightmare for processing because you're going to have to do an old technology batch, you can't carry on providing something to off-site that you know fails a fire test. That's what I would suggest to you is the natural reading of that email.
No, I don't agree. I think what I'm looking at there is if we've got to go back to the old technology, then that's what you've got to do. And if that's the reality, you have to do it.
Are you saying that in this email you're actually suggesting moving back to old process K15 for the entire market? Is that what you're saying?
It would have to be, because you can't distinguish. You can't make a batch. Practically, you can't really make a batch for one person that's labelled up for them, because when you're making a batch, you're doing a run, and it would give you logistical problems. It would give you all sorts of selection problems in the warehouse. If you change, you change.
But is that what you're actually saying to your colleagues in this email, that did you think that at the time, that you were suggesting moving back to old process K15 for the entire market?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you hoped they understood that, did you, at the time?
Yes. I think if you go with the next email up, you'll see, oh, well, maybe it's not this one, but there was certainly a comment from Gwyn at one stage that says the old process had also failed, which...
Yes, there is, I think, in the email chain. If we go up the email chain. We'll come to that in a moment. I think that might be in a separate email chain. We can come back to there.
Yeah, I do recall that.
Now, just back to your email. This is a direct instruction from you to expedite the production of samples of the OP90 fire retardant phenolic for testing. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you consider that to be a matter of urgency at the time?
I did, yeah.
And we know from having looked at the July report already that your instruction was followed and that those trial samples were sent to the BRE for indicative calorimetry testing, yes?
I believe so, yes.
Did you ever raise any concerns about the risks of supplying customers with new technology K15 outside of this email chain?
I'm not sure.
What other action did you take if public safety was genuinely your concern at this time?
Well, we were working on looking for a more fire-resistant version, if that was the problem. As I say, I seem to recall on this email chain that Gwyn came back and said, hang on a minute, there was a problem with the old process, and I think that's why we didn't move back to the old process.
If you really were concerned about public safety, why not do an awful lot more than we see in this email string?
Well, I'm concerned about the potential. This is the potential for public safety, but again, we're testing a system here, and it's a system that's failed. It's not necessarily the product.
There's no reference there by you or by anyone else in this string to the public, to safety, to fire safety, to general sale, is there?
Well, we're discussing a technical issue, a development issue, so we wouldn't normally put that in an email.
But if you were concerned, why weren't you doing more, given the pattern, the clear pattern that you've seen of how the new technology K15 is performing, and the fact you've still not got to a point of having a new technology K15 that everyone's comfortable with?
Well, in terms of how it's performing, I'm suggesting, let's go back to the old technology if that's the issue. And then I'm hearing that the old technology is also giving a problem, so that sounds like it's not the issue. It sounds like the issue is actually something else to do with the test.
Dr. Rochefort, if this product was being supplied to the market for use above 18 metres, it was obviously going to be incorporated into other systems, wasn't it?
It as far as I understood it, it was only going to be used with a non-combustible cladding on a masonry substrate. So
I see. So it was your understanding that those limitations were being made
that was
clear
certainly
to any potential purchasers.
that was certainly my understanding of the market.
Right. So, well, maybe that answers my next question, which was going to be, did you have any concerns about its performance when used in other systems, given what you'd learned about its performance in the two systems which have been
Clearly
observed or tested?
Clearly there's a problem in this system with the 8414 with whatever the cladding was in the system. There's a problem, so I'd be concerned if it was used in this system.
And other systems?
Well, if they had a non-combustible cladding, then I wouldn't, and it was on a masonry substrate, I wouldn't have been concerned at this stage.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Green.
What was it that allayed your concerns about the fire performance of the new technology K15, which meant that it was sufficient for the product to go on being sold to market?
I think it was comments that the old process was also giving problems in the same test. So again, it's pointing to the fact that it's a test issue rather than the product issue.
If we move forward with the story, we know that in 2008, you, Philip Heath and Mr. Meredith continued to be involved in dealing with queries from Kingspan off-site about the failed tests in systems incorporating K15. And on the 16th of July 2008, Mr. Wilkinson, Aidan Wilkinson of Kingspan off-site, put his concerns in writing. If we can just go to that. This is at KIN 403714. So we can see at the bottom of that page, Mr. Wilkinson has put his concerns in writing about the performance. And you see he says, following the recent fire test at the BRE, we have the following concerns. After the heat source was extinguished, the K15 continued to burn on for a considerable time. In fact, it was in excess of 30 minutes. It was only extinguished when the BRE applied water to it at the end of the 1 hour duration. The heat source had been extinguished at 22 minutes. Is this what is expected of this material? Is it normal for K15 to continue to burn for in excess of 30 minutes after the removal of the ignition source? Is the reason for the failure specific to a batch of K15, to the current formulation of K15, bearing in mind that this batch was specifically manufactured for these test samples, or to the details that we used? We are concerned with the lack of response with regard to the performance of the K15 product on the BS8414 test that we have completed. We have a further 4 tests booked, as you're aware, and at this time we are unsure of the way forward in terms of detailing the samples to pass the test. We have the samples built here at Sherburn, insulated with material from the same batch as the previous failed tests. Is the material appropriate to use on the future tests? You have now had the official video, so can see firsthand the issue with performance. Having performed this test yourselves in the past and achieved a pass, is this what you would have expected? Please contact us by return. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, above that, going up the chain, Mr. Heath then sends an email to you, to Mr. Meredith, Mr. Coppock, CCing Gwyn Davis, and he says this: good evening, we need to be careful how we answer the concerns of offsite. Any suggestions? Regards, Phil. Can you help us? Why did you think there was a need to be careful how the concerns of offsite were answered?
I'm not sure exactly what Phil means in this email. I think it's it's just one to be. We need to consider the details of this email and how do we address them. That's how I would have taken it.
Well, can I suggest that the reason Mr. Heath was saying you need to be careful is because offsite hadn't been told that there'd been a change in technology of the K15 and that you'd already observed a worsening of the fire performance in the tests that Kingspan had carried out with Metsec and Sotec. That's right, isn't it?
I don't know if it's right. I mean, that's your suggestion. I don't know that that's what he meant.
Is it possible that that's what he meant?
Well,
Looking back and thinking back now,
I don't know what he meant there.
were Kingspan offsite, so far as you were aware, ever told about the change in the technology and about what Kingspan itself had observed about its change in fire performance?
I don't know.
Well, this email is being written to you. Were you not concerned to find out? Mr. Wilkinson's clearly raising significant concerns about the way that K15 has performed. As the technical director, did you not take it upon yourself to find out exactly what they had and hadn't been told and make sure they were told the truth?
I think the email was actually not to me originally. It was from Aidan Wilkinson to Ivor.
Yes, but then you're clearly
Philip Heath
being
then
forwarded that
copies me
email.
in.
sorry, one at a time.
Sorry?
Sorry, you hadn't finished your answer.
I've just said that the email's written from Aidan Wilkinson to Ivor Meredith, and then Philip Heath has copied me in.
So would you have read that email below when he copied you in?
I think I would have read it, yes.
Let's look at the top of the chain. Here we can see your response to Mr. Heath, Mr. Meredith, and Mr. Coppock. And you say this, you say, I think the best response at the moment is to say that we are investigating possible reasons for the failure and we'll come back to them as soon as we are clearer on what caused it. Meanwhile, we recommend they do not test the other material they have used to fabricate the installations, as that was the same batch and may suffer from a similar problem. If necessary, I propose we could send old formulation material for the testing if you think this has a better chance and they are pressing. But this is undesirable for several reasons, and I'd rather delay and get the new FR product made as soon as Hestia can supply material, which we are waiting on. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
Why are you suggesting to your colleagues that you tell them that you're investigating possible reasons for the failure and you'll come back to them in circumstances where you had a growing body of evidence about the poor performance of K15 at this time?
I think what I'm saying here is, because the question was from Phil, how do we respond to off-site? So what I'm saying is the best response at the moment is to say we're investigating possible reasons. That's correct for the failure and come back to them. And to recommend they don't test the other material as it's from the same batch may suffer a problem. Until we understand what the issue is, then that's what we should do. Clearly, whatever was supplied to them was not passing their fire test. So we need to look at what can be supplied that could pass the fire test. And as again, I go on to say we could supply the old formulation for the testing if you think it has a better chance than their pressing. If the old formulation works, then we would have to, as I said before, make all the K15 product out of the old technology product, which is why I say this is undesirable for several reasons. I'd rather delay and get the FR product made as soon as Hestia can supply material. So that was the thinking at the time.
Well, Dr. Rochefort, I'd suggest that what you've put in that second sentence of that first paragraph is misleading. Meanwhile, we recommend they do not test other material they have used to fabricate the installations, as that was the same batch and may suffer from a similar problem.
Yeah.
You're proposing to tell them that it might be about the batch, but it's right, isn't it, that you knew full well by this time that there were serious problems with the performance of K15. You'd seen it in the tests that had been done in 2007, 2008, and in the calorimeter testing. Do you agree?
I agree there was a problem with the performance of K15 in the 8414 Part 2 testing that we'd done to date.
Yes. So why not tell Kingspan offsite that?
It's the system. The system test gave similar results, or in terms of what was happening. So clearly, it didn't make any sense to provide them with more material from the same product.
Why not tell them that you had experienced very similar failures? Why not be open with them and say, well, actually, as it happens, we've had similar problems, K15 continuing to burn under its own steam. We did these tests, they were failures, we've had the same problem. We're looking at a research and development product. Why not be open with them about this? Why suggest that it might be down to a bad batch?
Yeah, I see what you're getting at there. I think it was because my concern would have been at the time that we don't alarm them unnecessarily if it wasn't the K15 that was causing the problem, until we understand what is causing the problem, which is why I suggest sending the old formulation material for it. Now, that was the suggestion. It wasn't desirable, but it was a suggestion. If we did that, we'd have to supply that in the future for K15.
Mr. Chairman, I have some more questions on this, but I think it's a good moment to break.
Yes?
Yes.
Probably is. All right. Thank you. Dr. Rochefort, we're going to have a break now so everyone can get some lunch. We'll come back at 2:05, please.
Okay.
And again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're away. All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2:05, please.